sitting on mute over here doing the whole intro. Great way to start an episode, but it's going to get better from here. What's going on, everybody? Looking forward to this episode. I'm not going to do a long preamble here to getting started because we have a special guest tonight. Tonight we are joined joined by Hannah Cox, and she is joining us here from the great state of South Kakalaki. What's going on, Hannah? How you doing?
Good to be here.
So actually, I'm curious. Do they actually say South Kakalaki over there, or is that
Yeah.
they do?
Yeah. No, they do. They do. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
We moved here when I was 16. So I say they. They're not my people. I only kind of lived here briefly on and off, and I'm here because of COVID right now. But yeah, they say it.
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, us from Texas, we're very proud people. So we tend to say the Great Republic of Texas. Uh, we're
Texas has
we're
a lot of state pride.
oh yeah, yeah, it's strong. Yeah, whether it's football, barbecue, it doesn't matter. We're here for Texas pride. So Hannah, we were talking in the pre-show, and I was saying that I actually met you through. Uh, well, I learned of you through my cousin, who actually told me about your podcast when you started your podcast called Base. And I watched the first episode. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of nice." And I saw on Facebook you were posting articles, and I was digging where the lane where you were coming from. So, if you will, like introduce yourself and how you view politics in this current climate.
Oh boy. That's a hard question starting off. I consider myself politically homeless these days. I've honestly sort of felt like that for a little bit, but it really amplified starting in 2016. I'm somebody who grew up very traditionally Republican. I wasn't, a politics nerd. I liked politics. I followed it more than probably most people for due at a young age, but it wasn't my thing. And so I kind of just had these very basic views of conservatism that have been handed down to me by my parents. But I always sort of had like a little bit of a libertarian streak to them. Like I remember in 8th grade when gay marriage was really starting to become a hot topic, I was like, absolutely, gay people should get to get married. Like, what do you mean you think they can't get married? And I always
Right.
had these like very unique ways I would break with them on that. And so as I aged and as I graduated college, I was working in the music industry and I really didn't enjoy it. I wanted out. I'd been doing it during college and I was doing it after college, but I knew that it wasn't going to be my forever role or career. And so I kind of stumbled into political work at that time on the side, started doing some work for local orgs in Tennessee. And it was during that first initial exposure and kind of like getting my hands on the ground that I started to really try to sort through what I believed for myself and where I fit. And I really got into the Austrian School of Economics,
Okay.
became very interested in free market ideas. And I think those were ideas I'd always held, right? I believed in a limited government. I believed in individual liberty. I knew those things, but I didn't always know how to approach policy and apply those principles. And then so I think I really started to gain that around that time. I was in my early 20s. And that's really what I've carried through, the past decade with me as I've moved into politics full time. I'm really not a politics person. I always tell people I'm a policy person. I work on issues and I work on actually getting things done. And I try as best as I can to avoid the entire circus around the Democrats and the Republicans and elected officials and all of this thing that's really just become political theater and has very little to do with actually passing policy. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's my lane. By nature of the kind of work I've done, I've always sort of found myself able to get really big bipartisan things done. And I happen to really like people on both the left and right. I don't like their parties, but
Right.
I like them. And I work with a lot of people that I admire and think highly of. And so I've gotten to have this really cool experience in policy where I don't have this like straw man stereotypical idea about what these people are as characters on either side of the aisle. I know them, I work alongside them, we agree on some things, we disagree on some things, but oftentimes we can find ways to come together. And I think oftentimes we agree on the problems, we just don't always agree on the solutions. And so that's what my show based, my podcast has really been trying to achieve more than anything is to highlight, we actually agree on many of these problems. We can come together, but we need to start figuring out what exactly created the problem first so that we can correctly diagnose it and then work to address it. Because so often while we agree on the different problems we face, the left's idea is for more big government to fix it, and the right's ideas are for more big government to fix it, when really, if you dig into it, government often created the problems to begin with.
That's actually a great segue. I appreciate you. You just kind of tossed that thing up for me, and so I'm just going to go ahead and tee up the first topic here. Uh, so I was reading your article about. I messed in the pre-show. I got ready to say scholarship again, about student loans, and that was one of the first pieces that I had read from you, and I found it interesting because a lot of times, and so on the show, quick sidebar, almost exclusively read nothing but Axios. The reason being is it's not a bunch of extra garbage that you have to go through to get to like the meat, right, of what actually the facts are, right? I just want the facts. Link me off to other articles. I can peruse those, but just give me the highlights. Let me kind of see what's what, right? Um, because I found that reading CNN or Fox or whatever, there's a sway, right? They're trying to get you to turn a certain direction. And I don't want the sway, right? But what I found interesting about your article on student loans was that you actually laid out the problem up front. Like, okay, here's the problem. Here's the history of student loans, and this is why this is a problem. And it was like basically taking not just the, that, let's say the elementary argument of, well, I paid for mine, so they should pay for theirs, or you know, or hey, the government owes me for something, right? It was actually looking at the crux of it. And so I wanted to talk to you about this one because I'm on both sides of the fence here, right? In terms of not straddling it, but in terms of if they're going to do something that they're going to just blow a bunch of money, why not blow it on the people, right? And I found your conclusion to be an interesting conclusion. I would like you to lay out your case on why we should not forgive student loans, and a little bit of the history of why that's the case, or why we're
Yeah,
in this
well,
situation.
I love the topic of student loans and higher education because I do think it's something that people on both sides of the aisle truly do agree is a problem. We know that it's stagnating our economy. We know that it's having really detrimental effects on younger generations. We know that some of these lags impact all of us, as the ripples
Hmm.
kind of go out into society and into our economy. And so I think it's an important issue for us to look at. But I also think it's an issue that so few people really know the origins of or the history of public policy and how we got from here to here, right? I'm
Right.
somebody who went to a very expensive college. I don't think I made the best choices, but I also don't think I was very well educated going into the college world. And so I have student loans, and fortunately, my parents did pay most of my college for me. I could have been much worse off, but this is something that has been personal to me as well. I when I hear people say that they might cancel all the loans, I'm like, they shouldn't do it, but I mean, it would be nice. So
Right,
you
right.
kind of have that like feeling, right?
I'll take
It's
it,
bad,
but
but
it's
I'll
bad.
take it.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to like figure out, how we got to be here. Why is college so expensive? And so this was something I started studying years ago, actually, long before I made my recent podcast episode on it or wrote that article that followed it. And if you look back at what happened over the past, 100 years, you can make this really perfect timeline of how government kept intervening in the market starting in the 1920s, and kept getting more involved, and basically started inflating demand by subsidizing college for the general public. They kept
Right.
increasing the number of people that were applicable for these loans that they were giving. And so what they did was they kept increasing demand, but supply was not keeping up. And so what we've had happen is schools have been able to raise their rates of tuition far above what people could pay. If you look
Right.
at removing government from this picture, nobody, and I mean, when I say nobody, maybe 1% of people in this country could, but the vast majority of people could not pay what I paid to go to college per year,
Right.
$30,000 a year to go to college. People don't have that. The average American family with two people working brings in $65,000 a year. So
Right.
schools would therefore have a much smaller supply of people who were able to come, and they would have to drop their tuition rates in order to get a larger number of people to come. And if not, they'd have to close their doors. And that's what should be
Hmm.
happening. What we've seen happen is government government throw a wedge in this entire very basic economic picture of supply and demand and really screw what the laws of supply and demand would dictate in that scenario. And so tuition has gotten really sky high, even though we're dealing with a situation where it's becoming a bubble. There's nothing to indicate that these degrees are worth what we're paying for them. We see people are graduating, they're still not getting good jobs. They're often not getting jobs in their industry that they go to school for even. We see that they're not progressing in those fields very quickly. And we're seeing the rate of return increasingly go down for what people anticipate they will get for these degrees that they're paying for. So this is a really bad scenario. And again, this is something that's going to impact all of us, because as that bubble keeps getting bigger, more and more people are defaulting on their loans. They can't make their payments. Eventually, what's going to happen is the bubble's going to burst. And then that could harm all of us. The last time we saw a really big industry have that kind of thing happen was in 2008 with the subprime mortgage crisis. And when that bubble burst, it impacted all kinds of other industries. People lost their jobs in droves. The stock market collapsed. We saw, all kinds of things really just collapse at once. And so I think that's the scenario we're facing with the student loan bubble. I think there are many economists who are raising the alarm around this. And the solution to that is not coming in and just paying off the existing loans. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think it's fair. If you consider the number of Americans who go to college versus those who don't, you still have well under half the population that does not go to college. And so essentially what you're asking people to do, if we were to come in and forgive student loan debt, is asking those people who didn't go to college, who do likely still make less money than people who did pursue degrees, to pay off the degrees of people who are making more money of them. It's a very regressive policy that actually, it shocks me the left is so vocally supportive of, because it is something that would really be very unfair to the poor and working class in this country. And yet they are very brazenly supporting it. Another big problem with it, though, on top of everything else, is that it doesn't actually eradicate the problem. It kind of just keeps throwing more money at it, which is what started the problem in the first place. If you start forgiving these loans, now colleges have an unlimited piggy bank where they can continue raising their rates. They're not required to be on the hook for this. They're not held liable if their graduates are sold a bad product, aren't able to get a job. They have no liability whatsoever in that picture. They have no kind of accountability, no requirement to prove that their degrees are worth what they say they are. What we need to be doing is actually holding those universities accountable. I think that they should be on the hook if they're selling bad degrees, if they're selling bad rates. They do a lot of things behind the scenes that I think are pretty shady. One example of that is law schools currently will often pay, when their graduates come out, for people to hire them. So they'll pay, nonprofits like $2,000 a month to employ their recent law school graduate. The nonprofit gets free litigation assistance, and they'll do that for a period of like 6 months. And that way they can say their placement rates from people who graduate their law school are at this percentage. And that's absolutely false. We know that increasingly law school is not a great pathway. There's an oversaturation of lawyers in the market. They're not making as much. It's not that good of an idea for people to go to law school. And so people are getting bad information because of these things that they're doing behind the scenes. There needs to be accountability for that. There needs to be transparency. And we really need to get back to a place in our society and in our culture where we quit pushing college on everybody to begin with. There's a set number of things that you might need to go to school for. If you want to be a doctor, then yes, I think you probably need to go to school. If you want to be an engineer, yes, I think you probably need to go to school. But for the vast majority of things that people are going to school for, you don't need to go to college. We need to start moving backwards in society and get back to apprenticeships, get back to internships, let people learn on the ground, let them start making money while they're learning on the ground, get rid of things like occupational licensing. All of these things were put into place in our laws intentionally to try to protect people who were already in the industry, to keep their wages artificially high, to limit competitors coming into the market. And it has worked. It has worked to, really insulate many of these industries. But what it's done is it's hurt the average American worker. It's made it much harder to get on the road to success. It's made it harder to just do the right thing and get a job and work to support yourself. And so we really need to start working at the state and local level to move back those regulations when they've been put into place. And then as society, really start to try to push that. And that's something that we each can take on. If you're a business owner, if you're somebody who's an employer, these are decisions you can start to make. You can start to look for different criteria and hiring. Instead of just saying, do you have a degree? We can say, what's your experience been? Or even instead of your experience, we can say, let's see how you learn on the job as an apprentice. And let's see if you pick this up. And then if you do, we'll start to increase your pay as you learn and become more and more valuable to us. There's a lot of things we could be doing to get people on the road much more quickly. There's, of course, trade schools, which many people talk about. There's a great opportunity in the trades. I agree with that. But there's a lot of things we could be doing to move people away from school. And I think that that's something that we can't just look to government to solve. And I'll use myself as an example. I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to be in the music industry. I didn't see any point in going to college for that. But my family was of the mentality, like, you go to college. This was how they had pulled themselves up. This is how their parents had pulled themselves up from working class kind of people, poorer people in Alabama, to being upper middle class. And so it was very much in my family, like, you were going to college. This wasn't a question. Right. And the question should have been there. And the question should have been, why would you go to college? What kind of degree are you going to get? What kind of job will you get with that degree? Does that job pay enough to justify the cost you're going to take on to get that degree? Are there cheaper ways to go about this? And I think I'm proof that there is. I got a degree in music business. I worked in the music industry. But when I wanted to get into politics, I didn't go back to college to get a political science degree. I just started doing the work, started volunteering, right. Started working part-time on the side, did some pro bono stuff. I just started trying to learn in any way I could and started trying to build my resume in that way. And I was able to pivot and move into politics and move up quite quickly because I did the work. I think that there's plenty of examples like that show we don't need college degrees as these arbitrary kind of barriers. We need to really start to look at this differently in society and start to look at what is the person doing and what are the opportunities we could go ahead and give them to try to prove that they can do this work without a college degree.
So I don't know if you ever been to a black church, but you almost made me shout in here.
I'm a member of a black church in Nashville, actually.
There you go. Then you know what I'm talking
yeah,
about when I say you about to make me shout.
Yeah.
Because you hit on so many points that are really near and dear to me. So we actually didn't discuss in the pre-show, but I'm a programmer by trade. And I went to college, paid fees, have student loans still that I'm knocking off. But I never finished. And I didn't finish because I got an opportunity in my field. So, like, why keep going if I can actually make money right now and do this? And that was the route I kind of took. And it was a bit of a struggle, 2000 to 2008-ish, because everybody wanted the degree, right? What degree do you have? If you walked in the door with a bunch of degrees on your CV, then, oh, okay, he knows what he's doing.
Right.
And so I had to prove myself down a different path. But I get asked a lot because I've been in the game for 20 years now. I run my own business. I have developers who work for me. And a lot of people will ask me, like, well, how do people get into this industry? Like, what do they need to major in? And I'm like, nothing. Like, I'll send you a link. Take this course. And then when you finish that course, I'll refund it. And I'll talk to you about what we can do next to get you into some actual work, right? Because the programming game, you don't have to go to school. There's 16-year-olds that I know that are killing it, making six figures programming. They're still in high school. So they don't need to go to college. And so I'm very much so of that mindset that college is not a requirement. So both my kids that are one of my daughter's in college now, and my son is a freshman in high school, so we got a few years here. I told them both, you do not have to go to college. It is not a requirement. You're going to end up racking up debt, and it's not a requirement. You can do everything you want to do in college. You can learn outside of college. I think the biggest thing that opened up my eyes was I was 18. I was working at a call center, and one of the ladies that was working there with me, we used to have a lot of fun, crack jokes. It was a really great summer. But one of the ladies had a whole degree in history, and we were making $2 apart from each other. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, you have a bachelor's? And she was like, yeah. And she's making, like, I don't know, $9. I'm making 7 or whatever it was. And it was just shocking to me just to think, okay, that kind of started me thinking maybe this degree game isn't all that it's cracked up to be, right? But so you mentioned like apprenticeships and those sort of things and trades. I don't know if you follow, but the things that are going on in the tech industry, Google, Facebook, all of them, they used to have very high criteria for the people they hire. They've laxed on that now. So they're no longer requiring like top level degrees and and that sort of thing. So I think that's a good move. What do you think is going to be the outcome of moves like that? Do you think that's going to catch on more? And do you think if that does catch on, do you think the um, university system will actually change without some form of government intervention, like taking away subsidies?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like so many things right now, I think COVID could really have a determining factor on that. I've been saying to a
Yes.
lot of people, what we're going through with COVID is awful. It's truly terrible. But on the other hand, the silver lining of it is I think sometimes it takes something drastic to really break down systems so that they can be rebuilt. And COVID is impacting our educational systems from top to bottom. From starting with very basic childcare all the way up through college, and it's changing the way that people access information, and it's changing, I think, the concept of what we pay for and why. Right? If you're doing Zoom
Right.
classes,
Yes.
are you willing to pay $20,000? You're not. I don't think most people are. I think a
Right.
lot of people go to college for the experience, and I think that could remove it. So it's too soon to say, but I think that as we progress for the next couple of years, it'll be interesting to see the impacts on the data as far as how many people are going to school, what kind of schools they're going to, what kind of degrees they're seeking. I also think we're hitting sort of a like crescendo moment with this conversation in the society. We're kind of at a zeitgeist moment with student loans and higher education, where there does seem to be this like really big awakening in younger generations. Right beneath mine, I'm kind of in the middle of millennials, but for younger kids who I frequently see saying on social media platforms, I'm not going to college, it's not worth it, I'm not taking out those loans, I'm doing this, I'm going to go to this route. Like they really are starting to think through that, and it just seems like the conversation has changed from when I was growing up and coming up around that age, where it was like you're going to college, and if you weren't, people were like, they thought you were crazy, they thought you were throwing away your future. Like I remember being at
Oh
Belmont and somebody
man. Yep.
dropping out, and I was like, what are you doing, dude? I
Yep.
thought his future was over. I'm sure that he, still ended up playing guitar somewhere and had way less debt. So I'm sure he was the smart one in that scenario. But
Right.
I think there is a mentality changing. I think there's going to be a little bit less willingness for people to take on the kind of debt that we saw my generation take on. And I think that companies are starting to make some of those changes themselves. In part because the reality is we're facing a severe workforce shortage over the next couple of decades.
Hmm.
I don't think that's something that gets talked about at the national level as much as it does the state level, but I work with lots of chambers of commerce across this country, and they've gotten very involved on things like criminal justice reform. Not because they all of a sudden developed this, huge love of civil liberties, but because they
Right.
recognize we need the workforce, and we have so many people locked up that we've prohibited from working when they do get out, that we've got to get rid of some of these qualifications. They're blocking them from getting jobs, and we need to start training them. And so there's a lot of attention being paid to that. As those factors continue, I do think it will force schools to rethink what they're doing, to rethink their structures. I don't know that we're going to see massive change in some of these institutions, barring government changing its structure. I actually thought that was one thing Trump did well. He didn't end up going through with it, to the best of my knowledge, but he discussed putting these schools on the hook if they didn't have
Right.
if their graduates weren't, getting a job, getting income at a certain point of time, they might be on hook for paying some of these loans back. I thought that was fantastic. So I think that there will hopefully be more of a push for that. I think that's something that really needs to happen. I don't have a lot of faith in Congress doing it, because I don't have a lot of faith in Congress getting anything done. They're so stagnant and just absolutely delinquent in their duties. But I think that's where the Republicans need to push the conversation, because the push to cancel student loans is not going anywhere. It'll continue to be pushed under this new administration. And I think the counter to it needs to be the opposite, that schools need to be on the hook, that we need to quit inflating demand, and that we need to actually start looking at these free market solutions instead.
Yeah, I'm definitely right there with you, and I think this kind of segues well into another topic, another article that you've written that I enjoy as well. Uh, the talk of how government controls business, right? Like how far does it go in terms of controlling business? And you mentioned something. We'll sidebar before the article. Before the next topic. You mentioned something in the first answer about subsidies and how the government subsidizes um, higher education, and I I think, well, let me just ask it in this way: do you think the government will ever stop subsidizing uh, not just higher education, but we subsidize the meat industry and like all these sort of things. Like this, a friend of mine recently said the invisible hand is not so invisible. It's actually just the government, tweaking things, right? And I was like, that's a kind of interesting way to think about it, because yeah, that hand's not invisible if they're artificially, not just like the whole idea of like picking winners and losers with like Obama and Solyndra and all that stuff, but like literally picking an industry and saying we're gonna make sure you can still, operate and the people are okay with it. Like milk probably should be $4 or $5 based on how much it takes, but they get the subsidies, right? And that helps keep the
Right.
prices artificially low, which again, like, if that ever gets bad, like people are going to lose it because of those prices are just going to shoot up and they're going to blame the current president, whoever that is, right? Gas
Hmm.
prices are extremely high. It's this president, meat high. It's this president, and I think a lot of times we let Congress off the hook. We point at the person and the POTUS, but we're not holding Congress's feet to the fire. So anyway, let me reel that back.
That's
The
That's a
the
great point, though, and I just want to say, like, I agree with you. I actually wrote on that this week about, there's a problem with the growth of the presidency and the power that office continually is seeking and encroaching upon. But the real problem comes back to Congress. Like, these guys aren't doing their
right,
jobs. They could rein in the presidency and its power. They just continue to relinquish their power and hand it over because they don't want to do their job. So I think you're right. We need to hold Congress more accountable. That needs to be more the focal point.
yeah, definitely. And I saw. I didn't actually read it, but I believe you're talking about the one about Biden's executive orders. Something
Yep.
about the what kind of democracy is this or something. I didn't get to
Yeah.
read that one yet, but that one's on the list. But I think as a people, and like I said, this is why this podcast exists, because one of our main focuses is stop looking at the POTUS for these problems and stop looking to the government for the solutions. Because these
Hmm.
things, we keep electing these elected officials and they're just not doing it, but they're just there to retain power and they're just going to keep doing it.
Right.
So to bring back to the uh, higher education, do you think the government will ever stop subsidizing, and what will be the impact of the higher education system without those subsidies?
Well, without those subsidies, we know it would look drastically different. We have an abundance of colleges in this country today. I think we'd see a great number of them close, as they should. They're not providing very good services. Their degrees aren't really helping to place their students in good positions. And I think those would start to diminish. I think many of them would have to consolidate, maybe join with smaller schools or reorganize the way they're operating in order to stay solvent. And then I think some of them would have to, again, lower their prices in order to remain competitive in these markets. But I think it would really shape the whole face of what our public education system looks like were government to stop subsidizing it. I don't think government will start subsidizing it. I've never seen a government program go away in my lifetime, so it would be really cool if we could achieve
Mine
that.
either.
I don't know that we can achieve that, but I do think what we can achieve is education, pointing people away from it, helping to make people aware of other options, creating better options in the market ourselves, like I mentioned, if we're business owners or employers, and trying to create alternative pathways for people so that hopefully fewer and fewer people will choose to take that that sort of free candy. They're kind of
Right.
dangling out the side of the van. It's like, no, teach the kid to say no to the free candy. It's not good for them. They're probably going to get kidnapped and mugged. That's government with the student loans. So I think
Yeah.
there are free market solutions. There is a lot we can do to impact the situation, but I don't think government will just unilaterally stop funding them.
Yeah. It seems like our focus shifting government is difficult, right? You work on
Hmm.
policy stuff. It's not easy to shift it, and sometimes it may be the right solution. Um, just for giggles, I guess not giggles, but just for grounding me. Every year or so, I'll go back and watch the infamous Rand Paul. I mean, excuse me, Ron Paul interview where I don't remember this guy's show, but where they're just like going after him, they're laughing at him, they're talking about,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know
I
what I'm
just
talking
saw
about?
that the other week. Yes, it was hilarious.
Yep, and they're like, "Oh, you
Um,
want to smoke the weed?"
yeah,
And all that. Yeah,
yes. Yeah,
I
it
go
was
back
it
and
was a talk
watch.
show.
Yes, worst host ever. Like,
Who was that
I
guy?
don't
I'm
know,
so,
but I mean, that's
what am
probably,
I seeing?
yeah, like he just completely went after Ron and is just like trying to embarrass him. And it looked like it's more of like a debate, but he's up
Yeah.
there like just kind of just trying to debase his arguments with all this wild antics. And so it was, I always go back to that because Ron, regardless of what everybody else thinks about anything else he's done, in that interview, the things that he stated were right. And that
Hmm.
was 80 something, 80,
Yeah.
late 80s, early 90s.
They all have like the say no to drugs shows on or shirts on in the audience. I
Right,
was dead.
right. Yep, exactly. And just hearing the arguments of the people, right? This is clearly a mass of people who have been convinced by most likely politicians that these issues are a problem, right? And so we saw
Hmm.
that with the Trump presidency, where he would come out and say, "Oh my God, caravans from South America," right? And then focus would shift, and everybody like, "Oh no, the caravans from South America." And then if you go back, with Obama, it's like, "Oh well, we got to go green. We got to get this money to Solyndra," and everybody, "Oh, we got to get this money to Solyndra," right? And it's like people are just like just waving and just being swayed left and right. And I think largely, is there a possibility that we can actually, I think COVID did help, but where we can actually have a little bit more of an awakening with the people, to where the people stop accepting this like high partisanship that's being passed down to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the right focal point, right? Like I think it's really hard to change laws. It's really especially hard to change laws at the federal level. If student loans and the whole higher education crisis were couched at the state level, I would be like, yeah, we can maybe,
Right.
get rid of this. But because it's at the federal level, it's really hard to affect legislation. And so what you have to do is therefore then go to the grassroots and start to educate people and really start to try to move the tide in that way. And I love that you brought up that interview because and people should watch it if they haven't seen it because it was something
Please.
else. And everybody, the host and the rest of the audience, I mean, they look like total fools. You're thinking, who are
Completely.
these crazy Karens? Like
Right.
and Ron just looks so calm and cool and like logical in hindsight, but you know that when that aired, it was probably the opposite in most people's perceptions. And it's such a good view it at what it looks like to stand on your principles. And I think when you do, history will prove you right and you will move people where you are. And that's certainly been true of Ron. Ron has had a tremendous impact on this society in
Yeah.
the way that people view war, in the way that
Right.
people view government power, in the way that people view our money system. He's been incredibly influential in that way without ever winning, a national election. He's really built movements. And so I think that that's such an encouraging thing for people to see that are in our kind of positions right now, because it can be very discouraging living in today's America when you have
Yeah.
these principles of free markets and limited government and individual liberty. You have very few friends. You certainly don't have many friends in power, or in either of the two major political parties. And so I think it can start to feel like the battle's lost. But in reality, I don't think that's true. I think that we have a tremendous open window right now to educate people about the failures with government, to educate people about government power, to talk about the financial decisions we've been making. Again, COVID has really illuminated for so many people how broken our system is, how
Yes.
poor of a job it does at making just the very basics of decisions. And talk about like the situation with kids in public schools right now. Parents who can't get access to their public schools, whose
Yep.
tax dollars are being held hostage. Right? There's all of these things happening right now. There's a huge opening for people who are liberty minded to come in and really try to connect the dots for people and to try to then move that into advocacy. And so as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the moral arc of the world is long, but it bends
Hmm.
towards justice. And I think that quote is true. It can take a really long time to see change. It can take decades, and you might not ever even see the results of that change that you've worked on in
Right.
your lifetime. But I do think he was right that people who hold steadfast to their principles and who are consistent and who live consistently and advocate in that way, they will move the needle eventually.
Yeah, I think that's a great quote. I have them actually on my wall over here, and I have another one that I'm going to put up here, because, so I told you in the pre-show, I have these sidebars that keep popping up. My mind is going, but there's a great book by King. I've mentioned it before on the show. Where do we go from here? And you can
Mm,
hear it in his own voice. It's basically prior to him. being able to publish the book, him just giving thoughts on society and racial issues. And a lot of the people that are quoting him on the right and the left are misquoting him and not paying attention to the nuance of the, the growth of him, right? Because he was growing through that as well, and his views were being shaped and things. So I think that's absolutely correct. So you keep tossing these up. I'm just going to keep hitting these topics.
Please.
Being liberty minded and pushing this, right? So we talked in the pre-show about libertarianism a little bit, and I tend to lean a little bit more libertarian. As I mentioned, Jason Stapleton's simple way of putting it: we don't hurt people, and we don't take their stuff, right?
Hmm.
That simple idea of liberty, of like, government, let us do what we need to do. Don't come in and start manipulating markets. No, I know you've talked about this before, but things like, oh shoot, what's it called, Hannah, where the cops can,
Civil
qualified
access,
immunity,
qualified immunity.
right?
Yep.
Qualified immunity, and like all these things that they can do, this violence that are like physical violence, as well as just, they can just, hey, we're going to confiscate all your money, right? You're not guilty. We're going to take
Hmm.
your money. Oh, we found that you're not guilty. You didn't even do it. We're going to keep half of it, right? Like, these things are actually happening. So when I look at the landscape today, it seems like it's teed up almost perfectly for the libertarian movement to just like take off, right?
Yeah.
But the Libertarian Party is a little bit disjointed, and there's some problems there, especially with the community. It seems like there's all sorts of infighting. A lot of the people I hear talk about libertarianism, they view it as like the far sides of it, like a bunch of racist people who, want these really weird things that I just don't see in libertarianism. So the view, I think the messaging is missed, it's lost. Is there a possibility that we can see the Libertarian Party rise up and actually become prominent in the sense of at least getting on the debate stage, right? Get on the debate
Hmm.
stage so that some of these ideas can be presented on a bigger stage, or somebody with a very big microphone, right? Coming out and
Hmm.
grassrooting, as you say. Do you think there's a future where we actually see the libertarian party actually be relevant in the congressional and presidential sense, to where they don't have to keep moving over to be Republican and get lost in the mix?
Yeah, it's hard to say. You're not wrong that the Libertarian Party has a lot of issues and some unique issues. I think it is important to always point out that both parties on the other two sides are hot messes as well.
Oh,
What they
absolutely.
have that libertarians don't have is ballot access, is arbitrary regulations
Right.
not blocking them. And so, I think a lot of people don't know how rigged the system is, not only for the two parties, but for the candidates the two parties want to nominate. You have so little choice. Like, it is such an
Right.
illusion, our voting system of choice. That being said, those barriers to overcome are significant. Getting to 15% in the polls is going to be impossible when they don't include the candidates in the polls. And so, whether or not libertarian candidates can get on stage, whether or not they can ever get past the percentages needed to get matched funding, which the other two parties do, I really truly don't know. I think the only way I truly see it happening is if we just have a transformational leader arise. And I think that's aside from Ron Paul, what the movement has lacked. There's a lot of really smart people. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people doing good work in the movement, but we haven't had those kinds of really great transformational leaders come up that can unify people, that can bring the party together, that can focus our attentions. And that's what we're lacking. So I think if you see that kind of person arise, and maybe it's somebody who's already well known, I think then perhaps we could overcome those things. My focus, even though I am a libertarian, has been a bit more on things like ranked choice voting. That I think presents a faster pathway to breaking the two-party system. So I'm a bit more focused on breaking the two-party system than I am
Right.
elevating the Libertarian Party. But I'm open to any and everything that achieves that, right? If the Libertarians can break the two-party system, great. I think you're right that there's a huge opening for our message. People are recognizing the other two parties suck. They hate them. They want
Right.
other options. They're realizing increasingly on both sides, like, oh, these people are just totally rigging the nominations. We don't have a lot of choice. The Bernie crowd learned that
Yep.
the hard way in 2016. And I think
Nice.
that Increasingly, yeah, twice. Increasingly, you're going to see people get fed up and leave. What that point is, what that breaking point is different for everybody. But you and I have talked about that. You know, we both kind of had our experiences where we kind of had the awakening, like, hold on, both of these are really bad, and I don't think I want to like hang out with either of you anymore. Like, you're not really doing that much different. You're not really, there's not that much water between you as far as what you actually do. You talk very differently, but as far as your actual actions, they're pretty similar, and you're really working and conspiring behind the scenes to screw us over. So I think there is a potential for an uprising. I think there is a very strong populist sentiment in the country right now. You know, there's debates in libertarianism about where populism belongs in our ideology, and I think that it can be harnessed for good. And I think that there is great opportunity, but we've got to come together and quit infighting. That's one thing that's been really exhausting to me, you know, as a public facing person, is just the infighting among libertarians. Like, I already get attacked by Democrats and Republicans all day. I don't need my own people attacking me too. Good grief. Like,
you're fighting on the left and the right and getting hit in the back of the head. Like, what?
Right. I'm like, now I see why you have these people go fringe, because at least they have their rabid support base, right? That sticks with them. Libertarians aren't sticking with nobody except for Ron Paul. It's a lot. But I think more optimistically, there is real potential, again, with things like ranked choice voting, and there is real movement happening around policy at the state level. You know, I've seen people come together on issues. I work with people on the left and on the right to achieve many of the policy issues that I work on, and I work on a wide range of policy issues. So I think that's encouraging, and I think that that's where I choose to focus my attention. So I think when you're focusing on the state level and policy, then things can move a little bit quicker.
That's excellent. So I'm interested in ranked choice voting. So I've looked at that before, and I do believe breaking up the system is the most important part, right? Like, if we break up the system, and I really do believe if we get another party in there, they lose their stronghold, right? And I think they know that, right? Like, they know if they get one more party in, it's a wrap. Like, their power is shot. And I look at people like Rand Paul, who sometimes he can be a little partisan, but he tends to stick to libertarian principles. Thomas Massey, right? Austin Peterson. I look at these, you know, what I saw as prominent libertarians decide, oh, we're going to go over to the Republican Party because they can't get there without the Republican Party. And so my hope is that we'll start getting some of those people to actually stay in the Libertarian Party, push that up, and then hopefully get to that threshold. We'll see. But ranked choice voting, break it down for us. Why do you think that would help?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the subject matter, to be frank, but the reason I like ranked choice voting is my problem with the focus on third parties is I am under no illusions that were we to somehow break all of these arbitrary laws that the two parties put in place to block third parties, which is a substantial amount to overcome. Right. You know, let's say the Libertarian Party gains power, it would become corrupt too. The problem is with the institution of parties, and I don't have any faith that there's some exception that would prohibit the Libertarian Party or the Green Party or any other third party from also becoming corrupted. Some would argue that they already are. So I don't really see that as something I put my faith in. I think the wiser thing for us to do would be to break parties. And I think that not only because parties become corrupted, but because I think they've become a crutch from Americans, and they've really made people dumb. They've made people
straight ticket. I'm a Republican.
Yes, they don't know how to think about anything anymore. They don't know how to apply any kind of logic or reason or like critical analysis. They really just have this like very like meathead kind of approach to politics that you would anticipate to see in like a sporting match. And it's exhausting. We need people to have to pay attention to the policies again. It's silly to think that you can group 330 million Americans into 2, 3, 4, 5, even 10 camps. Like, we are very diverse people. There's no way that we can really properly offer representative government to that many kinds of people with only a small number of parties. And so I liked ranked choice voting because it elevates the candidate again. It puts them in the hot seat. They have to actually talk about their policies on a one-off position. People have to analyze their policies on a one-off position instead of being able to lean on this crutch of like, what party are they in? I like that it gives people two choices, right? Like, if I'm going to vote right now, I have to vote for the candidate I want, and then I get no say if the candidate I don't want loses. And so for many people who'd like to vote for third party, they don't do that because they're so afraid of the opposite party getting in power, right? Where if you had
Right.
ranked choice voting, let's say you wanted to vote for the libertarian candidate, but you wanted to say, but if the libertarian candidate doesn't win, I'd prefer this guy over this guy. Ranked choice voting gives you that ability. So I think it gives people the freedom to express themselves more openly, to take sort of, I guess, a risk, quote, quote, in their voting and vote for the candidate that actually is closest to theirs without having the fear of, quote, quote, throwing away their vote. You know, I put these in quotes because
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with that analysis, but that is what many people express. And so I think that that would be a really wise way for us to go about this process. We've seen it already in a number of states. California has it. I think it's Vermont. There's one of the northeastern states that has it. And it's been working pretty well. You know, it's still small scale, but I'd love to see it expanded. And it seems to be working very well in the places that it's been tried. And I just think of all of the proposals I've seen, it seems the most accessible. You know, we're not facing 50 states worth of laws banning this kind of thing from their ballots. We're not facing massive millions and millions of dollars in campaigns blocking people from being included in polls, blocking people from being included in debates. And so it's a way to kind of get around all of these intentional arbitrary laws the other two parties have put in place to block competition from coming in.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that I actually like was that you pick your primary candidate, or not primary in the voting sense, but your number one candidate, and then you have that other candidate that you like. Okay, well, like I like Gary Johnson. Let's just use him because he's the first
Safe enough.
libertarian when it came to mind. But then if my second choice is Joe Biden, right, or something like that, right? Like you get to pick,
Yeah.
in that sense, and that's one of the things that I really dislike about voting because I'm an optimist, but I'm very much so a contrarian when it comes to these politicians. And so when I go in there, it's like I'm trying to bust something up, right? Like I'm gonna vote for something to bust the system up, right? Like this particular position, I tend to read like I'm a nerd for the stuff, so I tend to read like down the ballot. Um, so like this position is going to bust up what they try to keep going here and that sort of thing. But you still only get that one, right? So it's like,
Right.
ah. And most people come in and they're just like, yeah, Republican all the way down. And don't care who it is, or Democrat all the way down. I don't care who it is. I just want
Right.
the Democrats to win. And I think that's a bane on our election system, in my opinion. So along those lines, the way that things get lined up with left versus right, one of the big arguments right now, and I heard a part of this that I'm going to speak on first. I heard a part of this that I've never heard before, and I was like, "Wait, what?" It shocked me. It was from is she a senator or is she in the House? Cori Bush. I think
I
she's
think
in the
she's in the house. I'm
yeah.
not
I
positive.
think she's in the House. And so she tweeted that we need to get $15 minimum wage done so that we can move to a livable wage. And I was like, oh wait, I thought 15 was a livable wage. You're telling me that there's another level that we're going
Oh
beyond
yeah.
that for minimum wage? I wasn't aware of that one. But so here's where I stand on the minimum wage. I pay no one less than $15 an hour. My programmers, we can make a lot more than that, but whether it's editing these videos or whatever the case may be, I pay no one less than 15, right? But I'm also not of the mind to conscript every business to that model, right? That's I don't believe that that is the right approach to do that. Now in Seattle, they launched this, and they didn't see the mass hysteria problems that you heard about. I guess that was what 2015 or so, 16 when that was first happening, where they were saying there's going to be mass job loss and all these sort of things, right? And you've spoken openly about the $15 minimum wage and the problems with it. And so I'm curious on your take. One, have you seen the data from Seattle and what was happening there? And then two, why the government shouldn't be involved in setting minimum wage, not just a 15, but at all.
Yeah, I haven't done like an in-depth case study on Seattle. I'm vaguely familiar with it. What I can tell you about Seattle is they have some of the highest cost of living in the country, and that them raising the minimum wage has not alleviated poverty in their city, has not actually done anything to get rid of that high cost of living. It's not made life more affordable. And that's always the case with the minimum wage, because what happens when you arbitrarily raise the rates with which businesses have to pay for their employees, they pass those increased labor costs on when they're not actually making back that same amount, right? If the amount of labor or amount of value that you produce for an employer is less than what the government mandates they pay you, they're either going to hire fewer people, they're going to pass those increased labor costs on to the consumer and the product, or they're going to do both. And so what we tend to see is that these increases actually make the cost of living go up for everybody. They make the purchasing power go down for people. And that's really the question that we should be having. It matters less the dollar amount you make. It matters more what that dollar can buy, right? What your actual purchasing power is. That's what we need to be focused on. I think that goes a little bit beyond where most people are in their economics understanding of this issue. And it's something that we haven't always done a very good job explaining to people and really breaking down what this looks like in our analysis. $15 would be doubling the federal minimum wage. It's ridiculous. I think minimum wage laws are a terrible idea at all levels, but they're especially stupid at the federal level. We have vastly different places in this country. We're a humongous country. We have a large number of people. We take up a massive geographic area. To say that somebody in California needs to make the same thing as somebody in Arkansas is absurd. The
or
cost.
in my hometown, as I told you, it's 3,000,
Right.
2,500 people or something. If you're making $15 an hour,
You rich. Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
baby.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
This is
but in
exactly right.
California, you're probably in poverty if you're in the
That's
Bay
exactly
Area.
right. That's exactly right. So, what's a living wage? Highly dependent on where you live, and also highly dependent on your lifestyle. And what we've got to
Yes.
recognize is that what people need to make a living. They need to figure out what jobs they need to do to make a living and then plot their pathway to get to them. I was doing minimum wage work when I was in high school. Actually, I was
Right.
doing minimum wage under the table before I was in high school, before I was legally old enough to work. I was working for people and
Mm,
finding odd jobs to do. And
where's that
yeah,
number to the
child
IRS?
labor, child labor were great for me. I was cleaning people's houses. I was selling Beanie Babies. I did all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah.
by the time I was 16, 17, I had already priced myself out of the minimum wage. I was already making $9, $10 an hour, back in 2005, 2006. Minimum wage jobs are meant for people to be able to get their foot in the door. These are the kind of things that could be really great for young teenagers to do to get their first job experience, start building their resume, start making some secondary income. These aren't typically supposed to be things that you're doing to pay all of your bills, right? We would hope that people in a free economy and in a society where we are generating so much wealth would begin their pathway of working early in life and would start learning how to obtain better jobs, would start acquiring better skills that would then demand them higher pay. And so I think that one thing that frustrates me about the minimum wage discussion is that we remove this level of autonomy from people. And instead we say, in a very paternalistic way, we're going to come in and tell you what you can work for. Now, when I was 12, 13 years old, I'm going to tell you right now, what I wanted to work for was 2 Beanie Babies a week. That was what I wanted. I loved Beanie Babies. I thought they were going to totally be worth a lot of money. I was buying into the Beanie Baby bubble, and I used to work at the store down the road doing inventory and running the cash register for a family friend who paid me in Beanie Babies, and I was perfectly happy with that wage. Now, had
The
somebody come in and
Bitcoin
told her,
before Bitcoin was Beanie Babies.
yes, I lost everything in that bubble, all my childhood savings.
That is
But
hilarious.
But yeah, I mean, if somebody had come in and mandated that I be paid $15 an hour for that job, that would have prevented me from acquiring that really great skill. I was learning how to do inventory and do taxes and do math when I was 12 years old. That's awesome experience. I was learning customer service. All these things that are really, really exciting and cool to get to learn to do when you're a younger person. When you say $15 an hour, all of a sudden, again, they're going to either hire fewer people to do those jobs. She probably wouldn't have hired anybody to do those jobs. She would have just done them herself. Or they're going to hire people who are more qualified than you. So what you start to see is that minimum wage laws, they basically just push people out of the job market who are unskilled. So you then see teenagers who are unable to get that first step into the job market, who are unable to start acquiring those skills. That has long-term repercussions for them. If they're not able to get that first step on the first rung of the ladder, that then hurts their chances to progress and move up. And that's when you get people who are 30, 40 years old still having to look at working minimum wage jobs because they haven't gotten these experiences. They haven't been able to propel themselves further and rise up. So it's highly problematic. We do see increasingly that not only does the minimum wage eliminate jobs, but it tends to hurt people on the margins the most. We see that it has larger impacts on communities of color. We see it has larger impacts on younger people. And we also see really detrimental impacts on the disabilities community, who are then basically priced out of being able to work whatsoever. And so it
Right.
doesn't really help people. It lifts a few boats while sinking a vast majority of them. And that then hurts the economy as a whole. And again, it drives up the cost of living for all people. It drives up the cost of goods. That means we all have less purchasing power, and the dollar continues to become more and more inflated and have less ability to actually buy the things we want. So it's another one of those things where I think the majority of people who believe in this policy are well intentioned, but they don't understand the problems that created the situation in the first place, and they're prescribing the absolute wrong ideas to address them and fix them. If we really wanted to increase the cost of living, there's a lot of things we could do. There's a lot of things we should be doing. Pushing small businesses out of the market, blocking unskilled laborers from learning and growing in their experience is the exact wrong way to do that. You're going to make it harder to get a job and make more people pushed into poverty, essentially.
Right, and there's some history to the minimum wage debate about white supremacy and how it was used to keep Chinese out the labor market and stuff like that. There's some interesting stuff. Actually, I was reading that on fee.org a while back, or maybe it was a fee
Yeah.
video, and I found the history of that interesting. Now, let me push back a little bit and see your thoughts here, because as a business owner, the point of business is to sell for one or buy for one, sell for two. So if I could pay somebody right now $5 or $2, I would. And I'm saying in the proverbial or not, in the general sense, I would, because I wouldn't, but there's a business owner that would, right? So how does the worker not get taken advantage of by a business owner that just wants to squeeze as literally as much profit as possible out of this, and basically line their pockets while taking advantage of some, whether it's a young or an older worker?
Yeah, well, the reality is, while I think you could see why people would make those decisions, smart business owners don't. We see that the vast majority of people in this country make far above the minimum wage. That's because the most expensive thing as a business owner, as I'm sure you know, is employee turnover.
Employees.
People want to
Yep.
retain their employees. They want to have employee retention. That's very important. It's very costly if they don't. They also want to incentivize their employees to be happy and to do good work when they're there with them. I can tell you right now, as someone who at times has become unhappy in my employment situations in the past, when I become unhappy, my productivity goes down, right? I
Right.
start producing a less of a good quality. I'm probably not as attentive. And I can tell a real difference in my work when I'm engaged and happy and feeling taken care of in my employment when I'm not. And I think that's true for most people. When you aren't taking good care of your employees, then that's going to also hurt morale. And so we see that most business owners do make those decisions, especially when they're able to. Now, some of them, when they're first starting out, don't have the margins to always do as much as they'd like, but we do see that most businesses continue to increase that. And so I think that it doesn't actually bear out that you have all these greedy business owners who are just trying to take advantage of people. I do think perhaps you do have some, but what we see happen with minimum wage laws is they push the small local businesses out that typically are working directly with their employees and typically are the people who are really trying to take care of them and do the right thing. When you implement minimum wage laws that are too high, it pushes those people out of market. Those jobs then close. And then what happens is those employees have fewer job options. And that's a good thing for corporations who tend to be the ones that aren't treating their employees as well, that do tend to be the ones that
Right.
underpay based on their margins. But when they come in and lobby for minimum wage laws, it's because they know this pushes their competition out. They then have more control over which employees get hired. And then they can keep wages artificially low within their businesses because they don't have any competition for those employees to go to. That reduces the lobbying power, the negotiating power of employees because they've reduced that competition in the market. They then can also treat their employees far worse. They don't have to offer as good of perks or incentives for their employees because where are they going to go? They've put all the competitors out of business. All you can do is work for these corporations now, and they're going to be able to set the rules of the game. So it's not through their bleeding heart that they come in and lobby for these higher minimum wage laws. There's actually a more sinister explanation for it. And the people who come in and argue alongside them are working hand in hand with these big corporations they claim to dislike so much.
Hannah, we could go on for hours and hours and hours here. It's great, great, great information, great content. I really I really love the way that you think about these things, not in a partisan divide of left is bad, right is right, or vice versa. I just absolutely enjoy that. This has been a pleasurable conversation. But we're up on an
Likewise.
hour, and I know it's getting a little late in South Kakalaki.
It's not my bedtime.
So I don't want to hold you up too long. But Hannah, where can people find you?
I'd love to connect with people. I'm at Hannah Cox7 on Twitter, Hannah Danielle Cox7 on Facebook, and they can look up my podcast on iTunes and Spotify, as well as YouTube and Facebook. It's Based with Hannah Cox.
Awesome. And I highly suggest the show. I've shared it out. I've sent it to people. I think it's an excellent show to catch up on. She really digs into the details. So if you're not looking to actually get some facts, don't watch. Right? That's like reverse psychology, right?
Right.
Hopefully, maybe. But we're the Political Free Agents. You can catch us every week, Sunday at 2 p.m. and Tuesday at 7 p.m. Haha. I know some of y'all thought I was going to get it wrong this time. Got it right. You can hit us up at politicalfreeagents.com. You can find all of our links to social media as well as all past episodes. But we're